This morning, President Trump announced a ceasefire between Iran and Israel, but hours later did an about-face and now says that both nations have violated it. Let's bring in Washington correspondent Alice Barr. Alice, it sounds so confusing. Where is the ceasefire sitting at this hour?
Well, Chesley, it looks like there's been another reversal, and President Trump now says the ceasefire between Israel and Iran is in effect, and that Israel is not going ahead with a planned attack on Iran. That had kind of spurred the appearance that this was veering off course. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office confirmed Israel refrained from further attacks following a Trump-Netanyahu phone call on Air Force One, directly following some pretty tough comments that President Trump made right before getting on board, where he said he was very unhappy with both sides, that both had violated the ceasefire agreement, and he even dropped the F word and said that they'd been fighting for so long that in essence they just didn't know what they were doing anymore, and he said he was going to try to get things back on track. And according to what he's saying and what the Israeli Prime Minister's office is saying, that does appear to be the case, that we're not going to see those strikes. And the way this all kind of played out is that Israel accused Iran of violating the ceasefire agreement with some missiles that launched toward Israel after apparently the timing, but didn't actually hit any targets. Iran denied breaking the ceasefire at all, but Israel was going to respond to that with, they said, forceful attacks, powerful attacks in the center of Tehran. And that is what has been stopped after that phone call between Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. The president said that those planes were turning around and were not going to strike those targets in Tehran. That's really what seemed to be setting this on a path toward escalation. Thankfully, we're not seeing that right now.
Absolutely. And Alice, how much leverage does the president really have realistically at this stage in the process?
It seems to be a lot, given that those planes apparently were on their way to drop bombs in Tehran, according to at least President Trump's telling of it. And that did not happen after a phone call between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu. And the Netanyahu office said that President Trump voiced his deep appreciation for Israel in that call and everything that they've done in degrading and maybe, coming close to destroying Iran's nuclear program throughout this 12-day conflict, which of course was punctuated by U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear targets over the weekend. But you can imagine perhaps the way that conversation would have gone to the question of how much influence does President Trump have. He could easily say, we helped you guys out in a pretty big way with those strikes on the Iranian nuclear sites that only the U.S. had the bombing technology to do. And, and then President Trump certainly wanted this foreign policy win of being able to say, okay, we went in, we went out, we executed those strikes, and now there's a ceasefire. And he was clearly unhappy that seemed to be unraveling before our eyes this morning. And so having that phone call with the prime minister, maybe he was able to exert a little bit of authority given kind of the IOU that he may think that Netanyahu owes him right now.
President Trump now on his way to the Netherlands for a historic two-day NATO summit. Do we expect any negotiations taking place there to try to resolve or at least cool down this crisis?
Yeah, I do think that this is going to now take center stage. It wasn't supposed to be a focus there. It was supposed to be really focused on Ukraine and Russia and trying to end that conflict. But we have heard, since the ceasefire discussions have been sort of percolating throughout the morning, we have heard some other countries talking about putting some pressure on Israel to end the war in Gaza, taking this moment. Qatar, which was involved in brokering this ceasefire, apparently Qatar adding its voice to say, let's move on now to ending the fighting in Gaza. And the Israeli hostage families that still have some 50 hostages that are held in Gaza, they have added their voices this morning, saying that basically taking this moment, not taking advantage of this moment of having degraded and brought about a ceasefire in Iran to then bring about a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza would be a waste of this moment.
Gotcha. All right, Alice Barr, thank you so much for your insight, and have a great day.